have the ability to rationalize almost anything by almost anything. And so how do we know that we remain true to that which was meant to be God's will? Because after all, we're calling it oral Torah. Not oral, my ideas, but it's supposed to be oral Torah. So Torah has a framework, and that's what we're going to discuss, a framework by which we have what we call legitimate derivation. Okay? So, and I just one last point in this regard, actually from the previous point of how do we know that it remains true. If we look at the opening statement of the first text of the lesson that the Medrash says, the opening text is as follows, text 4. Both the written and the oral Torah are God-given. Wait a second. Here we're saying that we have to derive it. How can we say it's God-given? At the most, we theoretically could say it's God-based. But to say it's God-given, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it does.
Huh?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, we'll get there. I know where you're going. You've been talking about this from day one, from minute one. But I'm going to give you all of the language to describe it for everybody. All right. Okay. So the example here that I want to give, let's go back to the analogy of when God gave, or the king gave, the flax and the wheat to the person. He wanted to see something extracted. He wanted to see bread. He wanted to see clothing or cloth. He wanted, and in order to do this, there had to be specific tools to do it. There had to be an oven to bake. There had to be a loom to weave. There had to be tools. In order that the intention should work out the way the king wanted it to, there had to be tools in order for that to be accomplished. The Torah also, God wants that the Torah the derivation ought to be in a certain contained manner. And so in order to do this, God gave tools in order for this to remain true to the original intent of the author. Okay? How to unpack and apply it. I'd like to hand something out of here. Okay, very briefly. Okay, so you see the bottom. So, when you take a look at this page, what do you see? You see a bunch of numbers, a bunch of code that really means very little. And theoretically, you can just, in order to continue doing this, you can just keep writing numbers and keep writing numbers. However, as all of you have already looked on the other side, as smart Jews do, you start the book from the back of the book. You see that this is a game of Sudoku. Now, the game of Sudoku is a perfect example for what we're trying to describe here. We're going to see that Rabbi Yishmael on text 5, page 45, work with me here, folks. He says as follows. In the book of Exodus, it says as follows, and this is regarding the giving of the Torah. These are the rules that you, Moshe, shall set before them. Says Rabbi Yishmael, these are the 13 hermeneutic rules of Torah derivation which were given to Moses at Sinai. So unlike the Constitution, which is given as a set of rules, and now go do with it what you want, it continually develops and changes as time goes on. Together with the giving of the written Torah and the received Torah, as part of the received Torah, God tells Moshe a set of rules by how to derive new law. We call these the 13 hermeneutical rules, and actually they are recited in the prayers every day. Every day, right before the beginning of Shacharit, we recite these 13 principles. That's how much it's ingrained till today, 3,500 years later, and every cheder yingel, like we say in Yiddish, every child in cheder learns by heart and knows these 13 principles of derivation of law. They may not know what it means until they get a little older, but they learn this by heart as to how to derive law in the oral Torah. if we're to describe it as this game of Sudoku, right? So the author, the creator of this game, he allows us to fill in any number. He says fill in any number in any square that you want. However, there are rules to this game. The rule is you got to fill one square with one number. Every line, up, down, horizontally, vertically, has to have a number from 1 to 9, and only one time. And with the game of Sudoku, almost always, I don't know if there is any, yeah, I'm sure there are, but almost always, there's only one answer for every square. You can't do it any other way. The author intended that which number goes in which square. Now, when we look at the game, we don't see it. We don't know which number automatically goes. You have to think about it. You have to discover it. You have to unpack it. But it's all there in the rules of the game, and the authorship of the game, and the creation of the game. The derivation, the rules of derivation in the Torah, they define and they give us parameters for what can be derived and how it can be derived. So in a sense, our derivation, it needs to be reasonable, okay? So this is especially so that once we consider that we're deriving new application, this was originally God's intent and will. And this is why these hermeneutic rules are so important for the derivation. What we're going to find, basically, is in this category of Torah, in the category of deriving, what we're trying to do, and we'll talk about it more, what we're trying to do is not to simply derive new law. We're trying to discover new law from that which exists. We're unpacking. We're finding what was the intent when the Torah said it this way or that way, described the case this way or that way. What was the intent? What were we intended to find out from it that was already included there in the way the game, quote unquote, was set up? Let's take a look at some of these rules. Are there any questions to this point of the idea? I don't want to, before we question, whether or not it's true or this, but in the idea. Do we understand the idea? Okay, good. It either means you're sleeping or it means it's making sense. All right, let's take some of these rules. We're going to take a look at two of these rules. Very, very logical approaches. These are pure logical approaches to how to derive one thing from the other. The first one is called a kal v'chomer. A kal v'chomer has a name in jurisprudence. Anyone know what it's called in I think it's in Latin probably. Fortiori? A fortiori? So, it means as follows. So now you know what it means, right? So, a fortiori it means that we have a weak case and a strong case. Okay? Lenient and stringent. Easy and hard. And if the law is, let's say in the easy case, the law is such and such, for sure it should be that way in the hard case, and vice versa. We'll see an example. So we infer here, let's take a look at figure 2.3 on page 47. To infer from the less obvious case to the more obvious case is called a fortiori argument. Okay, so let's take a look at what this means. So let's say, for example, you ask your boss for an extra hour for lunch. Okay? She refuses, and she says that there's a really important deadline coming up, and no, you can't take the extra hour. So, would it make any sense to ask for half a day off then? Obviously not. Here is the kal. This is the easy case, which would be an extra hour, and you're asking from that a half a day. Obviously, the logic which rules the half hour surely rules the half a day. Simple. It works the other way around as well. You ask your boss to take the day off, and she says, fine, no problem. Then you decide you don't need the day off, you just want to take an extra hour for lunch? Do you have to ask? The answer is obviously not. She let you take the day off. You can obviously take an extra hour, right? That's called a kal v'chomer. Let's see how the rule is applied in practical sense. Now, the following passage in the Torah, it deals with the case of somebody who pays a custodian to watch his animal. It's not his animal, say a car, right? You pay somebody, well, no, actually somebody who's a dog sitter. You're paying somebody to watch your animal, and like somebody with a kennel or a pet sitter, right? So here's what the passage says, page 47, 6a. If a man gives his neighbor a donkey, a bull, a lamb, or any animal for safekeeping, and it dies, it breaks a limb, or is captured, the custodian need not pay. So I paid you to watch it, and it dies. Has a heart attack and dies. Right? I don't have to pay. Why not? These things are considered basically, in today's insurance terms, it's an act of God. There was no negligence here. It's not a case of negligence. It's not a case where you ran into the street and got hit by a car. It's a case simply the dog up and died by the kennel. Right? It's an act of God. You don't have to pay. But what if it's stolen from the kennel? You had the office open, and all of a sudden you turn around, boom, the dog is gone from the cage, and somebody came in and stole it. So now, are you responsible or not? The answer is yes. That's what I paid you for. I paid you to watch it. Simple enough. Okay, those are two passages. Okay. Okay. Now, yes?
Quick question, Rabbi. Sorry to interrupt. The word stolen, I understand, but isn't the word captured? What's the definition of the word captured?
It's talking about somebody comes in and has an armed robbery.
Okay.
An armed robbery, you didn't pay the guy for an armed robbery, right? You didn't pay the guy. If somebody sticks them up, you're not paying them to put their life on the line for the dog. So in that case, you give up the dog and the guy's not liable. That's also, in this case, considered like an act of God. It's beyond what can normally be expected. That's what it means, but it's a very good question. Stolen does not mean by force. Theft is usually not armed robbery. Okay. All right. A carjacking. Right? Somebody puts it at gunpoint. And by the way, over there would be a question. What kind of force did they exert? They said, get out of your car, and so you left. That might be considered negligence. They stuck a gun in your face. That's something else. Okay. So let's take a look. Now the Torah tells us another case. That's talking about a paid custodian. Now what about a case where somebody I come to you and I want to borrow something from you. I want to borrow your horse to go ride to the next city. I'm going to borrow it from you. And if a person borrows an animal from his neighbor, and it breaks a limb or dies, he shall surely pay. Now the borrower is a different situation. Why would the borrower be obligated to pay and a custodian would not? Why not? What's the logic? It's a pretty logical thing.
Ownership is.
Excuse me, go ahead.
The borrower the intent is to use the animal
Okay.
for work.
Okay.
Versus somebody just being asked to watch it is just to care for it and keep it safe. So if you borrow and you're using and you break something, then you have to pay because you probably were negligent. Is that what it says?
No, he's not negligent. It
Oh.
just has a heart attack and dies. You're not negligent. It just dies.
Ownership is still in the hands of, still in the onus of the owner.
It says you shall surely pay.
That's the,
He shall surely pay, meaning that the borrower has to pay the person who he borrowed from. But the question is why, Alan?
Well, it depends on how it happened. You rent a car, okay, and you have mechanical failure, the car ran away.
Not talking about that. We're talking, let's
So
use the
horse-
example that's
riding
given.
the horse.
I
the
borrow,
horse
one second.
has a heart attack. Guess
Time
what?
out, time out. I
You
want to
make the
compare
horse have a heart attack. Mechanical failure.
Time out. Let's get this, I'll get to you guys in a second. I want to just clarify the case because it seems as if people are struggling with it. The custodian somebody comes to my kennel and says, I want you to watch my horse, I'm going to pay you to watch my horse. The horse dies in my care. The guy comes back, he says, where's my horse? He says, it's dead. It just died, it had a heart attack. I don't have to pay anything. Now I borrow your horse, and whether I'm riding it, whether I'm using it to pull a wagon, nothing negligent, or it's sitting in my barn and it dies, I have to pay. The question is why? Yes, Michael?
The borrower is deriving benefit.
Very simply, in the case of the borrower was the one, he is the only one in this transaction who's gaining anything out of it. So he takes on additional liability. In the case of the person who's getting paid, it's true he's getting paid, but he's doing it as a service for the other. The other person is requesting that you pay it, that you're a custodian for me. I want to go out of town. I want to make sure my horse is cared for. I'm giving it to you. It's true I'm paying you, but I'm deriving benefit from it, and so are you. And so I as the custodian, do not take on additional liability when I'm doing you a favor. Or even a business transaction, I'm not taking on additional liability. You want me to do you a favor? Oh, for a favor, you need to take on extra liability. That's all. Very, very simple sort of logic. You're not getting it?
I don't buy it.
You don't buy it.
You're saying that it's
Do
going to
you
be...
borrow it? Ha, ha, ha. Go ahead.
You're saying it's quid pro quo, Rachel.
Not quid pro quo. No. I'm talking about...
Getting something in return.
not quid pro
I borrow it so I can use it. Therefore, I owe you something in terms of how I take care of it.
So...
And if you pay me to take care of it, I've adopted the responsibility. I owe you due care.
Correct. I owe you due care. That's correct. So it
Whether-
takes care...
Whether the limb is broken because I didn't pay enough attention to how it was taken care of.
No, that makes a big
Or I
difference.
allowed it, the animal to run free in a place that might be dangerous.
No,
That's
one
all
second.
my
That's not what the Torah is talking about. The Torah is talking about I took care of it. I did what I needed to care for it. And like I said, an act of God. It had a heart attack and died. Not that I fed it something, or I didn't feed it enough, or I gave it something poisonous. We're not talking about that. We're talking about it simply, it was walking normally, and it died. 1 second. So again, I think that it, let's take the example. Let's take the example if you rent out your lawnmower. Okay, you rent out your lawnmower to somebody. Right. So you want to know that they didn't use it on rocks, and they weren't using it to clear pebbles from their lawn. They were using it to mow the lawn, what it's meant for, right? But what happens if it dies when they rented it from you? Okay? That's one scenario. The other scenario is somebody borrows it from you. You're not getting anything from it. So obviously, or at least it is logical to say, you don't have to agree, you don't have to, if you were writing the law, you might write the law differently. But it makes sense that in one case, there's a certain degree of negligence that one covers, and in another case, it's a higher degree of negligence. Anyway, that's what the Torah tells us. The Torah makes the distinction between these two cases. I want to get to the a fortiori over here. Okay, so now let's go to page 48, learning exercise 2, at least to understand what the Torah says. Okay? So, if the animal dies naturally, let's look at the custodian. Is the custodian liable, not liable, or are we not sure? So, the custodian is not liable if it dies naturally. Let's move over to the right side. If the animal is stolen, is it liable, not liable, or not sure? Liable. Okay? Now let's look at the borrower. If the animal dies naturally, is the borrower liable, not liable, or are we not sure? Liable. The Torah says clearly that if it dies in the borrower's hands, he is liable. Now let's take the fourth case here, because that's what the Torah says. That's the reading 6. If the animal is stolen, is the borrower liable, not liable, or are we not sure?
Still liable.
just as liable. Why should he be liable?
No.
Why should he leave-
Stolen at the point of a gun, he's not liable.
Sure he is.
Could have
It's
been
the weak and
killed.
the strong.
Let's use the case that's here. Let's not add new cases. If the animal dies, or excuse me, if the animal is stolen, if the animal is stolen, theft. We're talking about theft, not armed robbery. Let's use the cases here. Theft. It was stolen. And the guy is a borrower. Should he be liable or not? He should be liable. Why?
In the strong case of dying naturally, it would equally be the same in the weak case if it's stolen.
Why is that one strong and that one weak?
One is an act of God, and one actually you did have a little bit of control over. Therefore, liable.
Okay. In other words, very good. So, according to you, there's a fortiori here. A strong case to a weak case. The strong case is, this is an act of God. If an act of God, of death, of heart attack, we could have never foreseen, we could have never known, we say that the borrower is liable. In a case of theft, we're more watching, stronger guarding, a better cage, a better lock, an armed guard would have averted it. For sure, we should be liable. Okay? That's a simple a fortiori. And that is actually the first a fortiori that the Talmud wants to use. However, as we'll see in a moment, that the Talmud rejects that one. And here's the problem with an a fortiori. Here's the problem. What was that? Yes. He should be liable. I understand. So the guy would. So if you